Under the Skin is the epitome of show don't tell, as majority of this movie is carried by character behavior and gestures rather than any type of traditional dialogue. And what a lack of verbal expression typically does is shift its responsibility of communicating with its audience exclusively onto visuals and imagery, which comes with a request for your patience. This is a slow-burning art house film that hopes you're comfortable with reaching to your own conclusions, as it won't be providing you with any of the concrete answers you may be hoping for. And making an engaging movie in this way can be a formidable task in and of itself, but it becomes that much more difficult when the lead happens to be an expressionless and outwardly vacant shell whose thoughts are kept private and purpose unstated. Which brings us to Laura, our main character that we never even get formally introduced to. In fact, all we really know about her is that she has a single characteristic. She's a femme fatale for hire, and an easily replaceable one at that, since she herself is just a substitute for another who couldn't get the job done and is therefore being removed from her post. So we watch as Laura takes over her new position while coldly stripping a woman like a rag doll in an unusual, brightly lit environment. She then proceeds to dress herself in those same clothes, only taking the time to stop so she can quite literally look down on her failed predecessor, who defeatedly sheds a single tear. This emotion seems unusual to Laura, and we see her make her very first observation, which becomes a recurring theme in this movie. The swap seems to be at the behest of Motorcycle Man, who in turn is a looming presence that observes her. His supervision ensures that there's no deviation from this assigned task, something that seems to be a reoccurring issue, judging by the quick and routine way business is conducted. And we get a sense that there's a realistic chance of Laura repeating this mistake herself. What better way to gauge someone's true intentions than to thoroughly inspect their eyes, which is what Motorcycle Man does when he starts to doubt Laura's dedication. What he expects to find is a dark, endless abyss, but judging from the threatening manner he walks away, he doesn't seem completely convinced. Because no matter how composed a person, the eye cannot be controlled and is thereby known to betray its owner's thoughts. We see this emphasized if we track back a bit, as the movie opens with abstract imagery of a genesis of some sort. At first, heavily resembling the quiet infinity of the cosmos, but is soon revealed to be the creation of an eye, a very fitting transition, as the eyes are said to be independent, transcending the limitations of the physical body and a gateway into one's soul, something inwardly infinite in its own right. So what leads Laura to doubt her work, even after witnessing firsthand what happened to the woman who made the same mistake? Let's start by looking at the second observation we see her make. She's at the mall, carefully watching women go through their beauty regimens and then imitates them. Next, she's in her white van, watching men. In comparison, this immediately takes on a more predatory tone. She's now scavenging, looking for the perfect opportunity to wave an unsuspecting man over and helplessly ask him for directions. This being one of the rare times we get conversation, even a calculated glimpse of emotion, but it vanishes just as swiftly as her conversation partners do. Until one doesn't, and instead decides to take her up on the offer and accompany her for a ride. Despite his better judgment, the man follows her into an abandoned building, and it does not end well for him. Here the movie starts making sense of all the odd things we've been seeing so far, because it's revealed that Laura is in fact otherworldly. Although technically fitting, I'm hesitant to use the word alien, because so many things about the characters are purposely left ambiguous.
We wanted to stay away from alien stuff, engineering and alien stuff, alien design, which I love in films. I like seeing that when it's done well. That wasn't what I wanted to do. We wanted to create a space which felt alien, but in the knowledge that you're limited by the fact that you're doing it using human imagination. So it's a stupid task in a way, because you're never really, how can you get to it? So then you're kind of in dream space or nightmare, You're then kind of, you're then you're trying to get to places which are kind of more felt, than thought. They're more kind of, they're less, you bypass the intellect. That's the kind of idea of it, that you get to it. You're kind of trying to kind of get to the inner consciousness of things,
Personally speaking, I did feel it. This uncomfortable strangeness that took the form of something I understood and disfigured it into what I would imagine a bad acid trip would be like. We're treated to surreal sequences of visibly enchanted men still following a mesmerizing woman, never taking their eyes off of her and therefore never noticing that they're slowly sinking into darkness, remaining suspended in that substance until one quick motion draws out their insides, and all that remains of them is their hollow skin. And it's all happening at the forefront of a marvelously unnerving soundtrack. We watch different men succumb to this unfortunate fate, because this is what she was sent here for and presumably trained to do, in a most practical way, unflinchingly and deprived of sympathy. She sets this Venus flytrap up over and over again, and the repetitive nature of this may deter some audiences away from the movie. And understandably so. I think most would agree that this type of storytelling combined with the slow pacing may not be for everyone. I think this repetition was useful to drive a parallel to our mundane workdays. This is just another day at the office for Laura. She's following protocol. The skin she's in is just a uniform. And the men entranced by it, just numbers, no different than the ant she observes in the opening scenes, and so she remains unfazed. We get no explanation why, and it's fun to speculate, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. What I believe matters is what she observes in between her hunts, and I briefly want to point out 6 specific instances that played a role in the shift in Laura's behavior. While on a prowl at the beach, Laura witnesses a cascade of events that embody the human condition, as a woman thrusts herself into the ferocious ocean without any regard for herself, yet worried about her beloved dog that has drifted too far from shore. Her husband immediately follows, in turn worried for her safety. A complete stranger sees this and, without any hesitation, he too jumps in an attempt to save their lives, but managing to grab only the husband, who refuses safety, desperately going back for his wife. Despite his best efforts, the stranger washes up on shore alone and exhausted, now easy prey for Laura, who brutally knocks him unconscious, dragging him away in front of a now orphaned toddler who is crying in the background. Although what just played out in front of her was a heart-wrenching display of the selfless good a human is capable of, the only thing Laura walks away with is her prize. We know the sentiment is most likely shared across her species as the motorcycle man returns to the scene cleaning up her mess, but equally ignoring the vulnerable child. As the self-controlled Laura marches the streets among those she normally watches from afar, she unexpectedly loses her balance and falls to the ground face first, remaining there for a long moment, as if bewildered about what just happened or simply being incapable of getting up. She lays there long enough to draw a different type of attention to herself. As a small crowd starts to form, distant voices asking her about her well-being, right before gently lifting her back up onto her feet. Although this couldn't possibly compare to what happened at the beach, for the very first time, human kindness is directed to Laura herself, and getting to feel what it's like to be a recipient of such an act is a brand new experience for her. So it shakes her up a bit, and she continues her walk slightly less confident than when she started. Laura gets diverted from following her next target, for whatever reason, But as she turns to walk the other way, she gets swept up by a small horde of lively women enjoying themselves and each other on the way to the club, seeing yet another side of humanity that she's quite unsure of how to react to, but sticks in the back of her mind anyway. While stuck in traffic, Laura sees a flower salesman prick himself on a thorn after handing her a rose. He's bleeding and she notices it. Surely the general notion of this isn't new to her, but in this context it is. Humans are willing to wound themselves if it means giving another something beautiful. Once again, a selfless act of caring, and once again directed at her. And it resonates. Suddenly, Laura is no longer watching women just to imitate their physicality, or men in order to prey on them. She starts noticing casual human behaviors of many kinds, those that are beyond her benefit, those that are not just practical or protocol, as a light quite literally illuminates her face, showing her coming to some sort of realization. But as we all know, not all is always well here amongst us humans, and it's only a matter of time before Laura has her first encounter with hostility and aggression, something we're definitely no strangers to, but she seems to be. I found it interesting and definitely a little surprising that she's embarked on this mission without being prepared for this part of our nature. And it serves as a great insight of what will befall her by the end of the movie. All of this comes to a head when she picks up a man with neurofibromatosis. Their exchange is quite different from the others. He expects the usual, intentional or unintentional, negative response to his unique appearance, but Laura is genuinely unfazed and proceeds her usual flirtation. This response is so implausible to the man that he repeatedly pinches himself in disbelief. He doesn't know that Laura isn't bound by the human standard of beauty, not more than what she was required to learn for her mission anyway, and therefore doesn't differentiate him from any other man. In turn, her seduction doesn't really have the same blindingly hypnotic impact on him as it did on other men. He is timid and distracted, making remarks about the temperature and looks around the room skeptically, having to have his attention refocused back onto Laura several times. After all the experiences she's had, Laura is now in a place where she notices these types of gestures, and this triggers a faint image of her true self to fade in and out of frame. The hollow, otherworldly being she began as slowly blending in with her human form as her uncertainty reaches an all-time high. It's also no accident that my response to this man was different as well. We can imagine all the different ways our superficial society has made him an outcast, forcing him into a life of isolation due to something outwardly that not only shouldn't even matter, but is also something he has no control over. He even feels like he has to complete his errands at night when he's invisible to the world. And while naturally all the others were innocent victims who didn't deserve their fate, I sympathized even more with someone who couldn't recall the last time they had any human contact. His temptation to follow Laura was different than the others. It wasn't lust alone, but a natural response to a rare moment of being treated like everyone else. Although Laura is missing that context of our social prejudice, she still arrives at the same conclusion and shows compassion for the first time by letting him go, all the while compromising herself. Kind of like that rose she received. Immediately after the event, she stops to examine her eyes in the mirror in a moment of self-reflection. It's reminiscent of the way Motorcycle Man determines her loyalty, which she's now questioning herself. Speaking of Motorcycle Man, he's having to go clean up after her per usual, but this time it means finding a man she let go. This forces his hand, having to kill the victim himself and becoming sloppy in the process, as he leaves witnesses behind that could potentially create problems. Needless to say, this seals Laura's fate. We start to see her face convey a real emotion, panic. At this point, she has abandoned her post and gone rogue. While previously putting on an act of asking for directions, she's now actually lost. This is shown by her stepping into fog, unable to see even right in front of her face. This comes as a direct juxtaposition to her mind state while she was in the process of trapping men. As she slowly leaves the fog and things start to become more clear to her, she makes it a goal to imitate more than just the superficial things people do. And her first attempt at this is to try to eat a piece of cake, but she immediately rejects it. Now Laura wanders around aimlessly until a stranger stops her in her tracks and gives her some sort of direction. He offers her his help, and she accepts, for the first time reversing her role in this movie. Now Laura is the one following, and note that she has shed her outer layer, the fur coat, and with it her animalistic instinct to hunt for men. At his home, she finds herself in front of another mirror, but this time she's admiring her human form. She's wiggling her toes and bending her knees, as if thinking to herself that she could get used to this new body of hers, and the life that comes with it. The man seems to be kind, and you can tell by the gentle way he treats her and takes care of her. And she responds to this by approaching him romantically in an attempt at intimacy, not just intercourse. And as such is her second attempt at being human. But just like her visceral reaction to eating cake, she rejects this as well. It seems as though her body automatically evicts whatever isn't just skin deep, literally not allowing anything or anyone inside of her. Unfortunately, changing who you are doesn't happen simply because you decided it would. It's incredibly difficult and can perhaps never fully be realized, and her body's negative reactions are indicative of a conflict within herself. Subconsciously, she just isn't as ready or committed to conform as she hoped she was. She freaks out and in her panic abandons her safe haven, once again deeply confused about her identity. Instead of running into fog, this time she enters a forest. Now she's neither here nor there, not human but not quite the same otherworldly being we were introduced to in the beginning. And because she has one foot in each world now, she doesn't truly belong to either, and yet is vulnerable to both. And while Motorcycle Man seems to be unable to track her down even with backup, it will ultimately be our human world that will become her demise. She pushes forward, deeper into the forest, deeper into a confused state of mind, never being more lost than now. In this forest, she would run into a lumberjack, who is the direct opposite of the quiet man that treated her so well. The first red flag is when he began making small talk with her, asking questions that are very reminiscent of the ones Laura asked when approaching men she followed. This fear is soon realized when he runs after Laura in an attempt to force himself on her, in the process ripping her skin and revealing the dark figure underneath. She sits there, shell-shocked, holding the face she was trying to become and self-reflecting one more time before the man brutally destroys her. Motorcycle Man wanted to kill her for the human she was becoming, while the lumberjack wanted to kill her for the being she was inside. But these two versions are no longer separate entities. They're both Laura, but since she doesn't perfectly fit into a box of ideals on either side, there's no place for her in this world. And I think she realized that in the end. Being inspired to evolve by something beautiful, but then eradicated for it by its ugly side, is the rose and the thorn of her story. And I think it's portrayed beautifully by the dualistic nature of the previous shot, as the last observation Laura makes is, within